She handed it to me on a Tuesday morning in March. A single sheet of paper, printed, not handwritten, which told me she had thought about it enough to type it and format it and print it from the computer in the guest room that she had taken to calling her office. The paper was folded once, horizontally, the way you fold a letter when you want it to look intentional. She held it out across the kitchen table of the house I had owned for 26 years, with the expression of a woman presenting something she has decided and is not interested in discussing. She said, "Walter, Raymond and I put together some guidelines for how things are going to work around here. We think it'll make everything smoother." I took the paper. I unfolded it. I read it slowly, which I would have done regardless, because I am a deliberate reader and always have been, but which on that particular morning had an additional quality, which was the quality of a man reading something carefully, because he wants to be certain he has understood every word before he responds to any of them. The list was organized under a header that said House Guidelines and contained 9 items. Dinner at 6 o'clock. Laundry folded and returned to rooms by morning. No guests without 24 hours advance notice to Raymond and Brenda. Noise levels reduced after 9 p.m. The back porch reserved for family use on weekend mornings. Television in the living room off by 10 on weeknights. Grocery contributions expected weekly. A specific dollar amount listed. Kitchen cleaned within 1 hour of use. The 9th item said, "Please knock before entering common areas when we are having private conversations." Please knock before entering common areas. In my own house, the house I had bought in 1998, the house where June and I had raised 2 children, and repainted the kitchen 3 times, and rebuilt the back deck together in the summer of 2007 with reclaimed lumber from a demolished schoolhouse in Theodore. The house that had my name on the deed and had had my name on the deed for 26 years, and that had not, to my knowledge, acquired any additional names on the deed since the last time I had checked, which was 2 weeks before that Tuesday morning when I had gone to the Escambia County Clerk's office for an unrelated but related reason. I finished reading. I folded the paper along the same crease she had folded it on. I handed it back. She took it with the expression of someone who expected either an argument or a capitulation and had not prepared for what she was getting instead. I said, "Before you finish reading that, go check the mailbox." She looked at me. I said it again, the same words, the same tone, which was the tone I use for a clear instruction, which is flat and direct, and does not invite discussion about whether the instruction will be followed. She walked to the front door. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee. I heard the front door open, and the specific sound of the mailbox on the front porch being opened, and a moment of quiet, and then the sound of paper, specifically the sound of a certified letter being opened, which is a specific sound because certified letters are sealed more firmly than standard mail, and the opening of them has a particular quality. Then quiet. Then the sound of the front door. She came back into the kitchen a different person. My name is Walter Sims. I am 70 years old. I live in Mobile, Alabama, in the house on Magnolia Court that I have owned since 1998. And what my daughter-in-law did not know, when she printed her list of house guidelines and brought them to my kitchen table on a Tuesday morning in March, was that I had been to the county clerk's office 2 weeks before, and that the certified letter waiting in my mailbox had been prepared by my attorney 17 days earlier, and delivered by the United States Postal Service on the morning before she handed me the list. She had handed me the guidelines. I had sent her to the answer. Welcome to True Story. Hit that subscribe button and drop your city in the comments below. We read every single one. Now let's go all the way back to the beginning. I spent 37 years as a civil engineer in Mobile, Alabama, the first 12 working for a municipal engineering firm on Government Street, and the last 25 running my own practice, Sims Engineering and Site Consulting, from an office on Old Shell Road that I had opened in 1986, with one drafting table, one client, and the specific combination of technical competence and professional stubbornness that the first 12 years had built in me. Civil engineering is a discipline organized around one central truth, which is that the work you put into the ground lasts longer than you do. A drainage system I designed in 1989 for a commercial development in West Mobile is still functioning correctly. A road alignment I specified in 1994 for a county project in Baldwin County is still within tolerances. The thing I build outlasts the building of it, which creates in the person doing the building a specific orientation toward permanence, toward the long view, toward the patience required to do something correctly rather than quickly, because correctly means it will still be standing when you are not. I had 13 employees at peak, served clients across Mobile and Baldwin and Washington counties, and built a reputation in the professional engineering community in coastal Alabama that I was genuinely proud of, in the particular quiet way that a person is proud of something they spent their working life on, rather than something they received. When I retired in 2018 at 66, I sold the practice to a younger engineer who had worked for me for 9 years, and who had earned the right to own it, at a price that was fair to both of us. And I walked out of the office on Old Shell Road for the last time, on a Thursday afternoon in November, with the specific settled feeling of a man who has finished something correctly. What I had not finished in November of 2018 was the house on Magnolia Court. The house was a different kind of project. The kind that does not have a completion date, and that changes its nature every few years, as the people inside it change what it requires of them. June and I had been working on that project for 23 years by the time I retired, and retiring meant, among other things, having more hours to spend on it, which turned out to be something we both needed in the 3 years we had before she died. June Annette Sims, born June Annette Culpepper in Pritchard, Alabama, in 1952, was my wife for 43 years and the most immediately perceptive person I have ever known. Where I thought in systems and long timelines, June thought in people and immediate clarity. She could read a room before she had fully walked into it. She could identify what a person actually wanted from the first 3 sentences they said, regardless of what those 3 sentences contained. She had been a social worker for Escambia County for 21 years, which had given her perceptions that most people do not have, and that she applied to everything, including her family, including me, and including, in the later years of her life, the situation that was building around our son and his choices. She had a notebook for the garden, and a notebook for the household finances, and a notebook she called the observation book that she had kept since 1995, which was a record of things she had noticed about people and situations that she thought deserved to be written down, because writing things down was the only way to see the pattern when the pattern was still assembling itself. After she died, I found all of these notebooks in the study, organized by year on the second shelf, labeled in her handwriting. I read the observation book from 2019, which was the last full year before her diagnosis, and found in it 11 entries about Raymond and Brenda that she had not shared with me. Not because she was hiding them, because she was still watching and had not yet decided that the watching had produced enough for a conclusion. She was 3 months from a conclusion when she died. I could see that in the entries. She had been getting there. I got there 2 years later by a different route, which is the slower route of an engineer who needs more data points than a social worker to reach the same destination. But I got there. She died of a heart attack in January of 2021. Sudden, which is the word people use when they mean there was no warning and no time, and which in this case was accurate. She was 68 years old, and entirely herself on a Sunday evening, and gone by Monday morning, and the house on Magnolia Court, which had been ours in the specific way that a house becomes yours when you have loved it together for 23 years, became mine in the particular way that things become yours when the person you shared them with is gone, which is completely and wrong at the same time. I have not moved her reading chair. I have not changed the arrangement of the kitchen, which she organized in 2015, in a way that she said was finally correct, and that I have had no reason to revise, because she was right, and I knew it when she said it. I have been maintaining the garden along the back fence according to the notebook she kept about what went where and what each thing needed, which is detailed enough that even a man who had never tended a garden before is able to follow it and produce results that are recognizably close to what she intended. I had 2 children. Carol was 38, lived in Birmingham where she worked as a hospital administrator, called twice a week, and drove down to Mobile the third weekend of every month, without being asked and without requiring it to be an occasion. She had June's perceptions and June's warmth and had been telling me, in the careful indirect way that a perceptive person delivers information they know will be difficult, since the fall of 2021, that something about Raymond's situation was not adding up. Raymond was 44. He had spent most of his adult life in a version of the same general professional difficulty, which is to say he had started things and redirected them, and started other things, and described the redirection each time as a strategic pivot rather than as what it actually was, which was a response to the thing not working. He was not lazy in the way that people who do not work are lazy. He was industrious in the service of things that did not develop the momentum required to sustain the industriousness, which produced a pattern that looked different from the outside depending on when you were looking at it. He had married Brenda in 2016. Brenda was 39, worked in insurance claims management, and was organized and capable and had a quality I had identified within the first year of the marriage and that had taken me longer than it should have to name clearly, which was the quality of someone who views every situation as a resource management problem and every relationship as a vector toward or away from resources. She was not cruel, she was efficient. The efficiency was the issue. They had moved into the house on Magnolia Court in August of 2021, 7 months after June died. Raymond had been between projects, which was his phrase for the state I have described above, and there had been a situation with their rental in Midtown that he described as temporary and complicated, and that I had not pressed for details on, because the pressing would have produced details that would have required a response I was not ready to produce at that point. I had offered the spare bedroom. It was a generous offer in the way that offers made from grief are sometimes more generous than they should be. I had been alone in the house for 7 months, and the aloneness had a specific weight to it, and Raymond and Brenda's presence, even with all that their presence involved, was lighter than that weight. That calculation changed over the following 18 months. What changed it was not any single event, but the accumulation of a pattern, which is how patterns change calculations, which is through weight rather than impact. The pattern assembled itself in the way that patterns do, incrementally and without drama, and in the individual instances without obvious significance. And by the time the weight of it was sufficient to require a different response, the accumulation was long and specific. In September of 2021, 1 month after they moved in, Brenda reorganized the kitchen while I was visiting Carol in Birmingham. Not a dramatic reorganization, a practical one. The coffee maker moved from the counter where June had kept it for 11 years to a different counter because the different counter was closer to the outlet and the proximity was more efficient. The dish towels relocated to a different drawer. The cabinet where the glasses were kept rearranged by size and type in a way that was arguably more logical and that was not the way June had arranged them. I put the coffee maker back when I came home. Brenda did not comment on it. Neither did I. In November of 2021, Brenda mentioned at dinner that the living room furniture arrangement was not ideal for the way the room was being used, and that she had some ideas about how it might work better. She presented this as a helpful observation. The living room was arranged the way June had arranged it in 2019 after the last repainting, which June had described as finally right, using the same words she had used about the kitchen in 2015. Twice June had said finally right about the arrangement of our house, and twice she had been correct and I had not moved the things she had gotten finally right. I told Brenda the arrangement was fine. She said, of course, just a thought. The thought did not recur in conversation, but recurred in the specific way that not dropped thoughts recur, which is that I began to notice Brenda assessing the room arrangement in the way that a person assesses something they have not given up on, which is with brief glances that do not announce themselves. In January of 2022, Raymond asked me how I was thinking about the house long term. Not about Magnolia Court specifically, but about the property in general, the practicality of maintaining a 4-bedroom house for one person. He framed this as concern for my workload. He mentioned a senior community in the Spring Hill area of Mobile that a friend's father had moved to, and that had apparently been an excellent decision for everyone involved. He said he just wanted to make sure I was thinking about it. I said I was comfortable where I was. He said, of course, just wanted to raise it. I noted the conversation in the small notebook I had started keeping in October of 2021, which was the month I had decided that what I was watching was something that deserved to be recorded. The notebook had the same function the project logs I had kept across 37 years of engineering work had, which was to create a dated record of what I had observed and when I had observed it, because the record is the only thing that cannot be revised after the fact by a person with an interest in the revision. The notebook ran to 41 pages by the Tuesday in March, when Brenda handed me the guidelines. The specific thing that moved me from watching to acting was a Sunday afternoon in February, 3 weeks before the Tuesday with the list. I came home from the hardware store on a Sunday afternoon and found Raymond in my study. He had not heard me come in through the back door. He was at the desk, which was where I worked, sitting in my chair, with the desk drawer open. The second drawer on the left, which was the drawer where I kept the household documents, the mortgage papers, the property deed, the utility account information, the insurance policies, the folder where I kept June's estate documents. He had his phone in his hand, and appeared to be photographing something in the folder. I did not announce myself immediately. I stood in the hallway outside the study door for a moment, and I thought about what I was looking at, and what it meant, and what I was going to do about it. Then I walked into the study, and Raymond looked up, and his expression moved through several things quickly before it arrived at something casual and warm. He said he had been looking for the insurance information because he had a question about the homeowner's policy that he thought might affect his car coverage, and he had not wanted to bother me. I said I would handle any insurance questions myself, and that I would appreciate it if he did not go through my desk without asking. He said, of course, he was sorry. He had not thought it was a big deal. I said, Raymond, what's in the second drawer on the left? He said he had not been paying attention to which drawer. I looked at him for a moment. He held the casual, warm expression with the practiced ease of a man who has held it through other difficult moments and has learned to maintain it, regardless of what is underneath. I said, I'll take care of the insurance. You can ask me anything you need to know about the house. He left the study. I sat at the desk for a long time. I thought about what he had been photographing in the document drawer, and what a person does with photographs of a property deed and a mortgage document and an insurance policy, and I thought about the senior community in the Spring Hill area that Raymond had mentioned in January, and I thought about June saying you can always read a situation from what a person does when they think they are not being watched. She had said that in the context of her social work, a child's home situation, the real one, rather than the described one, was visible in what the parents did when they thought the assessment visit was over. The performed version and the real version diverged in the unwatched moment. I had just seen the unwatched moment. I called my attorney, Robert Haynes, the following Monday morning. Robert Haynes was 62, had been handling property and general practice law in Mobile for 30 years, and had the quality I valued most in a lawyer, which was the quality of telling me what was true rather than what was manageable. He had drafted the deed on the Magnolia Courthouse in 1998 and had handled June's estate and knew the full history of the property and everything connected to it. I went to his office on Monday. I sat across his desk and I told him what I had observed across 17 months, not with the emotional weight of those observations, but with the factual precision of an engineer delivering a site report, which is organized and dated and without interpretation, where interpretation is not required by the facts themselves. He listened. When I finished, he said, Walter, what do you want the outcome to be? I said, I want Raymond and Brenda out of that house by the end of April. I want a legal process that gives them the correct notice under Alabama law, and that is documented correctly, so that if they resist the removal, there is a clear record supporting the next step. He said, under Alabama law, a tenant at will, which is what they are, having been living there without a lease and without paying rent, is entitled to 10 days' notice, but I would recommend 30 days for documentation purposes and to minimize the likelihood of a contested removal. I said 30 days. He said, I'll have the notice to vacate drafted by end of week. We'll send it certified mail, which creates the receipt record. Walter, I want to ask you something. Are you certain you want to move on this before trying a direct conversation? I said, Robert, a direct conversation with Raymond and Brenda about my house and my future in it will produce a direct conversation about Raymond and Brenda's perspective on my house and my future in it, and I have already had 17 months of that conversation indirectly, and I know where it ends. I would rather have the legal document than the conversation. He said, then let's do it correctly. The notice to vacate was mailed certified on the Thursday of that week. Certified delivery requires a signature or a delivery notice left at the address. The delivery notice was left at the house on Magnolia Court on the Monday before the Tuesday when Brenda handed me the guidelines, at which point I had collected it from the mailbox myself and brought it inside and set it back in the mailbox, unsigned, because a delivery notice left in a mailbox is a certified mail notice that the recipient has not yet collected and that they are waiting to claim. She handed me the guidelines on Tuesday morning. I sent her to the mailbox. She came back into the kitchen with the certified letter in her hand and the specific expression of a person who has received information that has reorganized the situation they believed they were inside. Not one expression, several in sequence, confusion moving through disbelief, and arriving at the particular stillness of someone trying to determine what they are going to do next, with information they did not know was coming. She set the letter on the kitchen table. She stood across from me. She said, Walter, what is this? I said, it's a notice to vacate. You have 30 days to remove your belongings from this property. She said, you can't. She stopped. She read the letter again, more carefully this time. The specificity of what Robert Haynes had written, which was clean and thorough in the way of a man who has been writing these documents for 30 years, and understands that the language needs to be precise enough that the recipient cannot find a gap in it. She said, Raymond doesn't know about this. I said, Raymond will know when you tell him. She said, you're doing this because of the list. I said, Brenda, I have been watching what has been happening in this house for 17 months. I started keeping notes in October of 2021. I called Robert Haynes in February. The notice was mailed certified on a Thursday 2.5 weeks ago. You brought me the list this morning. The list is not why the notice exists. The list is why I sent you to the mailbox this morning rather than some other morning. She looked at me. I said, I want you to understand the sequence. You brought me guidelines for how things are going to work in my house. I let you finish handing them to me. And then I sent you to collect the document that tells you how things are actually going to work. That was the correct sequence. She sat down. She set the house guidelines list on the table beside the notice, and she looked at both of them, and the specific expression that settled onto her face in that moment was something I had not seen on Brenda's face in 3 years, which was the expression of someone who has encountered something they cannot manage, because Brenda was a manager, and management was her native mode, and the notice on the table in Robert Haynes's precise legal language was something that was outside the scope of what management could address. She said, what happens if we don't leave in 30 days? I said, Robert Haynes files for unlawful detainer with the Mobile County Court, and the Sheriff's Department facilitates the removal. That process is documented and public, and I would prefer not to use it, but I will use it if 30 days passes without compliance. I want you to know clearly that I will use it. She picked up the notice. She set it down. She picked up the guidelines list, and she looked at it, and she set it down. Then she stood up, and she left the kitchen. I heard her upstairs. I heard her on the phone. I poured another cup of coffee, and I looked at the kitchen that June had organized in 2015, the arrangement that was finally right. And I thought about the coffee maker that Brenda had moved to the other counter in September of 2021, and that I had moved back. And I thought about the second drawer on the left and Raymond, with his phone in his hand. And I thought about June saying you can always read a situation from what a person does when they think they are not being watched. I had read the situation. I had read it for 17 months, patiently and completely, and without announcing what I was reading. I had done what engineers do, which is gather the complete data set before drawing the conclusion, and I had drawn the conclusion, and acted on it correctly, and the notice on the kitchen table was the action. Raymond came home at 5:30. I was in the back garden working on the planting prep that June's notebook said needed to happen in March before the spring things went in. I heard his car in the driveway, and I heard the front door, and I heard the specific quality of silence inside the house that follows a conversation that has been happening before the person arrives, and that has suddenly stopped because the person has arrived. He came out to the back garden at 5:42. I know because I checked my watch when I heard the back door, which is the engineer in me, the one that timestamps things, because the timestamp matters when the record is needed later. He stood at the edge of the garden with the notice to vacate in his hand, which meant Brenda had shown it to him before I heard the front door, which meant she had been holding it ready and watching for his car since the moment I sent her to the mailbox. He said, "Dad." I set down the hand cultivator I had been using, and I turned around and I looked at my son, standing at the edge of the garden with the legal notice in his hand, and the specific expression of a person who has arrived at a conversation they were not ready to have, and who is determining in real time what posture they are going to hold for it. He said, "Did you talk to a lawyer about this?" I said, "2 weeks ago." He said, "You went to a lawyer 2 weeks ago and didn't say anything to me." I said, "I didn't have a reason to say anything to you until Brenda handed me the guidelines this morning." He said, "So the guidelines triggered this." I said, "The guidelines provided the timing. The decision was made in February." He said, "What did I do in February?" I said, "You were in my study on a Sunday afternoon with my document drawer open and your phone in your hand. I came in from the hardware store and you were photographing something from the second drawer." The expression on his face changed in a way that confirmed what I had been certain of but had not been able to prove, which was that the Sunday afternoon in February had been deliberate and not accidental. An accidental intruder apologizes and over-explains. Raymond had done neither. He had performed innocence, which is different, and the performance had been practiced enough to pass in the moment, but was now, standing in the garden with the notice in his hand, no longer performing. He said nothing. I said, "Raymond, I don't know what you were photographing, and I don't know what you intended to do with it. What I know is what I saw, and what I saw was my son in my desk with the drawer that contains the deed and the mortgage, and your mother's estate documents, with his phone in his hand. That is the February event." He was quiet for a long time. The back garden was doing what March gardens do in Mobile, the specific visible return from winter, the early green things showing at the soil line, and the bulbs June had planned along the back fence, beginning their first movement toward light. He said, "We can't leave in 30 days. I said, "You can. You have an income, and Brenda has an income, and you will find somewhere to live in 30 days. Because finding somewhere to live in 30 days is a solvable problem for 2 employed adults. What you cannot do is stay in this house. I want that to be clear, and I want you to hear it not as anger, because this is not anger, but as the decision it is." He said, "Why isn't it anger?" That was an honest question, the most honest thing he had asked all evening. I said, "Because anger would mean I had been surprised." I was not surprised. I have been watching what has been happening in this house since October of 2021, and I have been keeping notes since October of 2021, and I went to Robert Haynes in February, because what I had been watching had reached the point where watching it was no longer the correct response. None of that is anger. It is a process. He said, "You've been keeping notes." I said, 41 pages. Dated entries. Starting October 2021. He sat down on the garden bench that June had put there in 2008, because she said, "You needed a place to sit and look at the thing you were growing, that looking at it was part of the growing." He sat on the bench, and he looked at the garden, and he held the notice in both hands, the way people hold documents when they are not ready to put them down, and not ready to act on them either. He said, "Mom would have talked to me first." I said, "Your mother would have read the situation before I did. She would have talked to you in 2021, and the conversation would have been earlier, and different, and probably more effective. I am not your mother, and I am not as fast as she was on the human things, but I got there." He looked at the garden, at the early green things showing at the soil line, at the bulbs along the back fence where June's notebook said to expect the first color by the 4th week of March if the winter had been mild enough. He said, "She planted all of this." I said, "She planned all of it. She wrote it all down. I'm following the notebook." He said, "You've been following her notebook." I said, "Since she died." She was specific about what went where and when. The writing is clear enough that even a man who never gardened before can follow it and have it come out close to right. He sat on the bench for another few minutes. I did not fill the time. The garden was present, and the March light was what it was, and he sat with both of those things, and whatever else he was sitting with. Then he stood up, and he went back inside. They left on the 26th day, not the 30th, the 26th. I know because I counted from the date on the notice, and because Robert Haynes had advised me to keep the count and to document the departure date in case it was later disputed, which it was not. They took what was theirs, they left what was mine, including the coffee maker that had migrated back to the outlet counter at some point in the final week, which I noticed and noted without comment. Carol drove down from Birmingham the weekend after they left. She arrived on a Friday evening with groceries and a specific energy of relief that she maintained for the full 3 days she stayed. The relief of someone who had been watching something from a distance for a long time and had just watched it resolve correctly. She walked through the house on Saturday morning and stopped in the kitchen and looked at the arrangement that June had described as finally right in 2015 and said, "It looks like Mom's house again." I said, "It looked like Mom's house the whole time. They just added things to it." She said, "You removed the things." I said, "I removed the things." She helped me with the garden on Saturday afternoon, following the notebook the way I had been following it, the two of us working along the back fence line in the March warmth that mobile produces in the week after you stop expecting it. Carol read the entries aloud from the notebook as we worked, and I did the physical part, and it took us 3 hours, and at the end of 3 hours the garden looked the way June's March entries said it should look. Carol sat back on her heels at the end of the row and looked at it. She said she would have been happy with that. I said she knew what she was planting. She always knew what she was doing. Carol said, "The house rules list. Did you know that morning?" I said, "I knew the morning before." The notice was in the mailbox Monday, and I brought it inside and put it back. I knew what was in it. I was waiting for the right moment to send her to get it. She said, "So you were waiting for her to give you something?" I said, "I was waiting for her to give me the timing. She was going to give me something eventually. That is who Brenda is." The guidelines list was what it was. It gave me the correct moment. She said, "And you just sat there and read the whole thing?" I said, "I read it carefully. I folded it on the crease she had folded it on." I handed it back, and then I told her to check the mailbox. Carol looked at the garden. Then she said, "Dad, that is the most you thing that has ever happened." I said, "Your mother would have done it faster." She said, "Mom would have done it in 2021. I said, "I know, I'm slower on the human things, but I got there." She laughed, which was June's laugh, and I let the sound of it sit in the back garden in the March afternoon for a moment, before I said anything else. The house on Magnolia Court is mine. It has been mine for 26 years, and it will be mine for however many years remain, and when those years are finished, it will go to my children, both of them, equally, in the specific and documented way that Robert Haynes helped me specify last spring when we updated the estate documents. The deed is in the second drawer on the left. The insurance papers are there too. And the folder with June's estate documents, which is where it has always been, and which nobody will photograph from my desk again. The garden along the back fence is following the notebook. The arrangement in the kitchen is finally right. The coffee maker is on the counter where June put it. That is the house on Magnolia Court. That is what I built and what I maintained and what I protected. Not loudly, not dramatically. With a certified letter and a clear sentence, and a mailbox that was ready before the list arrived. If this story stayed with you, drop a comment below and tell me which moment hit you the hardest. Hit that like button, Subscribe if you are not already here, and I will see you in the next one. True Story uploads every week. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss one.